Clayoquot Sound, Mears Island, Temagami. The call of Canada's last stands of virgin timber have been heard across the country for decades. We usually think of remote British Columbia or Northern Ontario when we hear that call, but today we take you to a unique ancient forest in Newfoundland on the boundary of Grossmorn National Park, north of Cornerbrook. The United Nations Food and Agricultural Organization recently drew attention to the state of our planet's shrinking forests. Forests that are vital to our survival continue to shrink at an alarming rate. In his way, Father John McCarthy of Newfoundland has taken up the UN's challenge. A forester and a Jesuit, Father John sees his efforts to preserve old-growth forest as a higher calling.
Somehow, my work as a scientist, my work in studies and research, and my work as a priest, they're one and the same. And I don't find any separation between, say, presiding at Eucharist and working in the forest. I am both priest and scientist and priest, and it's very difficult to separate the two. You know, when I was 11, 12, 13 years old, I was thinking of the religious life. I went to Brother Rice High School. I remember coming home one day and saying to my parents that I was going to enter the Brothers. I came home again the next day and said I wasn't going to enter the Brothers.
Instead, John McCarthy went off to study forestry at Newfoundland's Memorial University and the University of New Brunswick. Eventually, he found himself in Florida, where he graduated in 1983 with a master's in soil science. The same year, John McCarthy became Father John McCarthy, Jesuit.
I was always very close to the campus ministry there. One of the priests turned to me and said, "John," he said, "how long have you been thinking about the priesthood?" And I must say, I almost choked and fell off the chair at the same time. So I couldn't evade the question, and I came to realize to myself that if I didn't at least address this question and try to grapple with it, that I wouldn't be happy the rest of my life, because I knew that I would always have this what if question in my mind. And so through a number of years of prayer, a lot of discernment, a few tears, a lot of direction from especially my parents, I finally entered the Jesuits.
Father John, as most people know him, found with the Jesuits a match between the spiritual and natural worlds.
The forest act as almost like a theophany of God, or it's just screaming out in its own way of the beauty, of the majesty, the sacredness of God somehow. And I think that's what motivates me a lot. That there's something sacred here that when we destroy it, it is no longer there in some way. What does this have to do, being out in the woods, with priesthood, and specifically Catholic priesthood? Because I know many people, I know even I stay at the Cathedral Parish in Cornerbrook, and one person phoned up once and asked, yes, but is he a real priest? You know, they wonder what this priest is doing in the woods. And I used to joke that I was cutting wood for Cornerbrook Pulp and Paper, trying to get a bit of finance for the parish.
Father John's work takes him to the northern peninsula of Newfoundland. He came here to study forest development in the Main River Watershed, one of the last untouched forests in the province. As he began his research, Father John made a groundbreaking discovery.
The forests here in the Main River, these are the forests we're in right now, these are true old-growth boreal forests. Now, many people, when they hear the term old growth, they automatically think of forests in Western Canada. They think of large, massive trees, hundreds, if not thousands of years old. Here in Newfoundland, we have the same forest but obviously because of the species and the climatic differences, you're going to have the attributes of this old growth can be quite different than what you have, say, in coastal British Columbia.
Father John is the first person to recognize that the Main River Watershed is old-growth forest. But loggers from Cornerbrook Pulp and Paper, the company that owns the logging rights in the area, have already made some small cuts. This old-growth wood is among the best for high-quality paper, and it's a situation that makes Father John nervous.
You know, you liquidate the old growth and then it becomes a managed forest that may be pre-commercially thinned and tended over the years. So it doesn't have the same characteristics that an old growth forest would have. We're quite good at saving buildings of significant architectural design or cultural manifestations, the Taj Mahal, the pyramids, and on. The Aztec ruins. Well, before us we have like a significant natural patrimony with all our ingenuity and technology and economic finesse and intelligence. Humans can never build or rebuild or recreate old-growth forests.
The difference between old growth and managed forests is stark. This is a managed forest. It's harvested and allowed to regrow. This is the old growth forest of the Main River Watershed. Father John says this area is over 7,000 years old, untouched by events like fire and insect outbreaks. Father John knows just how unique old growth forest is, and that's put him in the middle of the debate between environmentalists and the paper company.
So what foresters will tend to do in old growth areas is to liquidate the forest. In other words, you get in, cut it all, and then you can manage the second growth, and that's what Cornerbrook Pulp and Paper has been doing here. This is the best quality pulp fiber around. And George Van Dusen from the company George will say this is the best quality. They make a high quality newsprint. So there is no doubt that my research work and my speaking has certainly animated many people vis-a-vis the Main. It's all in these. This is where most of your nutrients are. Yeah. And it's good to rely on the solid research data, which is quite helpful. We don't say it's old growth because we think it's old growth. We say it's old growth because we have the data to support such statements. So to speak as priest and to speak as scientist, there's certainly some kind of this energy or power in that that to date has been effective.
So George, why does this area have to be logged?
There's no alternate area that's available to Cornerbrook Pulp and Paper to go and get that supply of timber. Those timberlands, we've held the rights and paid for those rights for decades. The government at some point in time, allocated that land as timberland. I guess there was a decision at some time made that it would be used to get some to generate some economic benefits, employment, and other economic benefits for the people of the province.
Correct me, George, if I'm incorrect, but certainly, the Main River Watershed is the kind of the last remaining large standing stock of good quality wood, and the wood is excellent. It's slow growing, so it's excellent for what Cornerbrook Pulp and Paper makes.
Turning the old growth forests of the Main River Watershed into a managed forest means work. Forestry provides over 1,500 jobs in western Newfoundland, a place where more than a quarter of all people are regularly out of work. A place where those who do work often work only seasonally.
If they don't come up with a plan now for the future, I'm only 28 years old, I got a good while left yet. And if they don't come up with something, it's going to be shortage of wood, the mill's not going to be able to run.
Do we cut down all the trees, because we'll have jobs cutting down the trees, Or do we try to manage our forest in a way so that we'll still have a forest in 20 years' time? Well, you know, the same argument could have been made 10 years ago about codfish. We saw what happened when the jobs in the fishery were given prominence.
The manager of the Cornerbrook Pulp and Paper Mill agrees this is not a debate about jobs. He also agrees with Father John that the forest in the Main River Watershed is old growth.
The economic importance of the industry in Western Newfoundland is self-evident, and I don't think there's any point in quoting the numbers because it is to some extent irrelevant to the questions at issue here. If the right thing to do is to not cut at all in the Main River, then the right thing has still got to be done, you know, regardless of the economics, I think.
Sheehan believes the Main River Watershed can be harvested without damaging the integrity of the old-growth forest. Cornerbrook Pulp and Paper wants to use the timber in that forest to manufacture newsprint for customers up and down the eastern seaboard. The paper mill is a massive operation owned by Kruger of Montreal, manufacturers of such household products as Cottonelle, White Swan, and Scott towels.
You're under a lot of pressure from Montreal to make have competitive wood costs. There's no doubt about that in the pulp and paper industry. So how do you balance that then with you know, say the demand to or the suggestion or demand to lock up an area that, you know, that you could easily harvest? And
well, at the same time we're under pressure to manage costs. We're under pressure to address the social concerns and the ecological concerns that have been raised, and you know, there's a lot of that kind of pressure from Montreal as well. It's
easy to dichotomize these situations, you know, the bad guys, the good guys, and then there's no doubt in times of conflict or like in times of war that one side will always demonize the other side. So it's easy to create villains. There's no doubt about that, and. For example, for the environmental side, you know, the forest industry may be seen as the villain. And from the forest industry's perspective, those tree huggers may be seen as obnoxious villains. So I would like to say that there are no villains, that in some way there always has to be a healthy respect of the other, and also I think a healthy self-criticism.
And John's able to bring to that whole forum a calm demeanor and a sense of respect that garnished by all, that allows for that forum and debate to take place without people getting all hot and heavy about it.
Well, Father John is a scientist, and as such, I think it's much easier for us to sit down and discuss these kind of things with somebody like Father John McCarthy, because he is a scientist. He doesn't have any personal interest in winning. That's not his goal, to win. He certainly has goals, but they're not necessarily to win at any cost.
Mainstream media and the coalition have tried to paint a picture that Cornerbrook Pulp and Paper is going to go in there, and the word they use is devastate the whole Main River Watershed. I would estimate that we're probably over 50% of the watershed that will not be touched by any of our development. So the impression that's been given that we're going to alter this whole watershed is certainly a false one. And I think we'd support protecting part of it.
A lot of that is upcountry, which is probably not really that commercially viable.
Cornerbrook Pulp and Paper has plans to harvest only a small part of the land it has license to. But that still means part of the watershed will be cut by some method. Some people say there is more money in using the watershed for tourism and recreation, especially since the watershed is on the border of Gross Mourne National Park, an area that already draws a lot of tourists.
The surrounding environment of the national park is really critical. Just as we have impacts associated with our visitors coming and seeing us, we have to manage those. We also have to work with our partners in the greater landscape to manage whatever impacts might be associated with commercial forestry. Wild animals don't know where boundaries are, and they come and go, and there's critical habitats just outside of the park that are every bit as important to them as what we find inside the park.
I've been flying around since 1960 in Newfoundland, and it's amazing how the roads and hydro projects and wood cutting has encroached upon what was wilderness at one time, and it's gradually encroaching in this area. Just that I've been up here trying to run a salmon camp and an outfitting business on the Northwest Branch since 1960. And we just got things being very viable a few years ago, and now the people that come to our camp, they're there for the ambience and the unique natural scenery and so on. Even if our viewscape is ruined by clear cutting or harvesting or roads or so on, we lose all our customer base.
I don't think it's so that the research doesn't support our viewpoint here. I think we do support groups like the Protected Areas Association, but that's not a problem to us. In the long term, in this kind of an environment in which we function, I think it's important that we are involved in our communities.
I think we take our social responsibility very seriously, and that's why we try to be open. We're trying to let people know what we're doing. We want to engage in dialogue.
For Father John, part of that dialogue must include an appreciation of the link between God and nature. This river serves as the focal point for the intense spirituality Father John finds in the outdoors. The river is lined by old-growth boreal forest that serves as his congregation.
I see myself as speaking for the natural world that has no voice except in and through the human person. So now, whether that's, some people may term lunatic, for me it comes out of my own faith. I mean, that's what really animates me, is the fact that I look around and I've been moved by the beauty of the world, but it's a beauty that leads me to God, you know, to the transcendent beauty. It's almost like not a recognizable people, like there's not a group of people you can say these people are oppressed or poor, and so you stand with them in their life, in their desires for justice and for peace.
Speaking for the natural world could lead Father John to conflict with the congregation of Cornerbrook's Cathedral Parish, a parish Father John sometimes calls home, a parish community he often ministers to.
If I pursue the path I'm pursuing, then, you know, I will probably come up before stiff opposition, if not serious questioning. I know a number of our Jesuits have spent a number of years in prison because of their involvement with the peace movement. Again, I use an extreme example, but if I proceed ahead, there could come quite serious opposition, especially if you see me as representative of the church and supposed to be to stand for people, and yet I'm advocating something that will minimize or shut down the livelihood of certain communities. I've really struggled with this, and I haven't come up with any answer at all. When I come into this forest, I come into this forest, you know, studying it scientifically and just been able to appreciate its beauty and its majesty. Someone else coming in, for them it's a bread and butter issue. That for them to log these forests, it's what provides the employment and care for their families and their homes.
Recently, this river was designated a Canadian Heritage River by the federal government, something the paper company supported. Cornerbrook Pulp and Paper has also agreed not to clear cut in the old-growth forest. Logging is now on hold while the company works out its plans. But that doesn't change the fact that the paper company still owns the legal rights to log in this forest.
A lot of their timber licenses have 99-year leases, which is in some way anachronistic today, because most provincial legislations provide for maybe a maximum of 20 years timber license. But in those years, intervening years, of course, our values change. In some sense, the forests will continue to grow, whether they're logged now or left alone. I think the Main River Watershed, in many ways, acts as, one could say, the clackwat sound of Newfoundland. it has acted as a quote-unquote watershed in terms of how Newfoundlanders view their land and view what they wanted to do with their land and how they value their land.
Look at it for all the values. Look at it for the caribou, the marten, the ecotourism, the outfitters that are already in there, the local people who love to go there and fish, who love the quietness and the very special feeling they get from that. Look at the point of view, the values that Father John McCarthy points out when he talks about the value and the spirituality of nature.
The combination of spirituality and nature is something the Jesuit order sees as important. So important that the Jesuit Father General in Rome has asked Father John to head a future Jesuit World Ecology Center. The combination of God and nature just makes sense to Father John.
Somehow the priest has always been asked through the centuries to be the medium between the divine and the secular, between humanity and the earth and the divine, between God on the mountaintop and the people in the valley. So the priest is always seen as a mediator, as the one who goes back and forth between God and the world. And so for me, that means to speak of God's beauty and of God's grandeur and of God's witness in and through God's creation. And if that's all I do in my life, I will say that I will have lived my life to the full.
That profile of Father John McCarthy was produced by Vision TV Insights' Andrew Younger.